When it comes to going for a ride and you need to get to the start of your track, there's a couple of ways you can do that. Each of these ways have their pros and cons, and quite often, even I find myself quite indecisive about it. So today I'm going to talk about 3 main ways that you can get your bike from home to the start of your track. Stay tuned. So not many of us are fortunate enough to have a national park or an MX track in our backyard. So quite often we need to get to where the ride starts. And that's not always the most convenient or the fun part of your day. So depending on things like the bike you ride, where the ride starts, the type of riding, and who you're going with, it's actually quite hard to say exactly what the best method of getting to the start is. And this means we have to face limitations. Things like wreckage bikes, things like how heavy your bike is, or what kind of tracks you can do, or what kind of tires you're on. All this actually matters. For example, I wouldn't enjoy riding my DRZ 200 kilometers to get to the start of a ride. It's a great bike to be on the tracks, but on the highway, it tends to get boring. So how do we get to the start of the ride? So I'm going to talk through the pros and cons of 3 of my favorite methods of getting there. First, the most basic, simply riding to the start of the ride. Second, I'm going to talk about using a trailer. Again, it's a very popular method that quite a few of us use, and it's got its own benefits. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about using a bike rack or bike carrier. It's kind of my favorite way, and I see the practicality of it, so you might find that I'm a bit biased about it. First, we can ride to the track. Now this is the simplest. And honestly, we do this most of the time. We just ride. So what are the benefits, or why do I like riding? Firstly, it's cheaper. You don't have to spend money on buying additional equipment. The only thing you will be spending a little bit more on is tires. Your knobby tires are going to take a fair bit of abuse and going to wear out a lot faster, taking the highway to get to the tracks. Another advantage is that it's easy. You just hop on your bike in the morning and just ride off. You get to the meeting point, everybody's there, and you just leave. So essentially you're maximizing your time and spending as much time on the dirt as possible. And another benefit is that you don't have to plan as much, and the ride becomes a lot more flexible. You can enter the bush from one place, ride wherever the wind takes you, come out from some other place, go back in, ride wherever you want for however long you want, and then just come out wherever and ride home. The only limitation you will have is your fuel capacity, and that's what big tanks are for. And this freedom isn't something you get if you trailer your bike, and then at the end of the day you have to make sure you come back to your base camp just so that you can load up your bike and go back home. Another benefit of riding your bike to the track is that you get a sense of what your bike is like. So if you've got any loose nuts or bolts, or sense any odd sounds coming from your bike, you can sort it out or take care of it before you get into the bush, where recovering the bike becomes a lot harder. So imagine the scenario where you've not ridden your bike, and the first time you start it up is at the unloading point. And once you've started the bike, everything seems okay and you head off, and 10 minutes into the ride, a nut or bolt comes loose and the bike is no longer rideable. Now you need to recover the bike from deep inside the bush as opposed to somewhere on the roadside. So this is a scenario that I wouldn't want to be in, and hence another reason why you should ride to the track rather than carry it. Now trailering your bike is another option, especially if your bike has legal limitations on where it can ride or when it can be ridden. Now I'm referring to wreckage bikes and clubridge bikes. There's quite a few benefits in trailering as well. The biggest benefit is that you can have your bike on wreckage and you'll save a bunch of money on registration alone. So in 1 year of ownership, the trailer will pretty much pay for itself considering how much you save on rego. So a decent trailer is probably going to cost you about $500-600, maybe about $1,000 if you buy it new. But at the same time, you're also paying about $500-600 on registration for your bike. Minus what you pay for club rego, you're still pretty much talking $500 extra on keeping a bike road registered. Secondly, you also don't get exhausted on unnecessary highway miles. Sometimes you spend even 2 hours getting to the start of your track, and that means another 2 hours coming back home. And I personally find the ride back home quite tiring, especially if it's on a highway and there's nothing that's worth looking at along the way. And if you trailer your bike, by the time you start your actual track or your adventure ride, you'll be a lot more energized because you're starting fresh. And another benefit is that if you have some sort of mechanical trouble, you've got a way of getting your bike back home. So the third point is a bit contentious. Some people don't find it an issue, but it's personal preference. That's luggage. Now, if you are trailering your bike, you don't need to carry all your luggage. Now, imagine you're going on a 3-day trip to, say, the Victorian High Country. So that means you'll be taking your tent, your food, your camping gear, extra change of clothes, and all that needs to sit at the back of your bike. And if this is going to be an adventure ride, it's quite likely that you'll be doing your tracks and the more challenging parts with a much heavier bike, and you spend a bit more effort managing your bike. And for myself, I personally prefer riding a light bike, so I'd much rather not have all of that. So if I were to trailer the bike down to the tracks, I can leave all my camping gear, food, clothes in the vehicle and just take what I need for that 1 day's ride. But I've got friends who, even if it's a day trip, like to carry a lot of stuff. They'll have a complete repair kit and at times even an entire service manual for a book. Yes, you know who I'm talking about. And another added bonus is that if you're going on a long trip and you've got other friends who are joining you, you can all trailer together. And that means you've got company for the drive to and from the track. Now the third option is the rack. Now that is something that really works for me. I absolutely love it and it's made my life so much easier. So what is a rack? Essentially, it's just a platform that hangs off the back of your vehicle. So the main reason I like the rack is because it's small and compact and it barely takes up any space. Leisure riders like myself, we barely get 5, 6, maybe 10 rides a year that we would use the trailer for. If like me, you've got limited space and you don't have the extra space to store a trailer, a rack works perfectly. When you're not using it, it just sits in the back of your garage and barely takes up any space. So this is the rack I use. I use a Ballard's rack, which I got off MX Store, and it sits in a corner and barely gets in the way. So racks are actually significantly cheaper than trailers. So you're looking at about $250 to $300, maybe a little bit more depending on what accessories you get with it. But you're looking at half the price of a trailer, which is pretty okay. And the good thing is, unlike a trailer, this probably wouldn't rust and it'll be in a better condition in 5-6 years, and I can probably sell it off without losing much money on it. One more reason that I really like my rack is that it's easier to drive with. Driving a trailer is not too hard, but reversing one takes a fair bit of practice and a steady hand, and often I need more than one attempt to get it right. But the bike rack, on the other hand, is a lot easier to drive with. It just fits onto your vehicle and you barely even realize that it's there. And just like a trailer, you also save a fair bit of money on your wreckage bike because you don't spend $500 on road registration. So there is one thing though that you need to be mindful when you get a bike carrier. You need to get a vehicle with the right tow capacity. So my KTM weighs about 100 kilos, whereas my DRZ weighs about 150. Now the rack itself is about another 20 kilos. So we're looking at a combined weight of about 120 to 130 for the KTM, or 170, maybe even 180 for the DRZ. Now the general rule of thumb on a vehicle's tow capacity is that the tow hitch or the ball can take about 10% of the vehicle's full tow capacity. So if a vehicle has a towing capacity of 1.5 tons, 1/10 of that, the ball itself or the hitch can take 150 kilos. So my Land Rover Discovery has a tow capacity of 3.5 tons. So I can comfortably take about 350 kilos. And that's more than enough. But at the other end of the SUV spectrum, we get SUVs like the Toyota RAV4 or the Honda CR-V, which have a tow capacity of about 1.5 tons. So which means it's 150 kilos on the ball. So on paper, you might think that it can handle it. But the thing with those is that a lot of those, if not all of them, don't have a body-on-frame chassis construction. And they have a unibody frame, which means the tow hitch literally just clamps onto the body. And I'm a bit skeptical about putting so much weight on something like that. Once we actually tried fitting the DRZ and the bike carrier onto a friend's Honda CR-V, and that didn't go very well. The suspension was almost bottoming out, and we weren't very confident of driving it. So I wouldn't go on exactly what the vehicles recommend tow capacities. I would use a bit of common sense as well. But that being said, I have seen pictures of cars like the Commodore with a tow hitch and a DRZ sitting on top of it. In fact, I've even seen, if I'm not mistaken, a Ford Focus sedan with a tow hitch and a DRZ at the back. But at the same time, you should realize that all that weight sits so much further beyond the rear axle that the vehicle's handling is not going to be ideal. So you're taking quite a chance there. And at the same time, I'm not too sure how legal that might be. So I wouldn't take my chances. So another benefit in using the bike carrier is that it's so much faster and easier to load a bike. Now, a trailer is pretty easy as well. You just roll on, strap it down, and you're good to go. But in real life, you need to struggle with your straps a bit longer, and it does take a little bit of time. But with the bike carrier, it's a completely different story. All you need to do is roll the bike onto the ramp and fasten the two clamps onto the foot pegs. Using a fork brace is always a good idea, just so that you don't spoil your fork seals. Same goes for unloading a bike. You just park, undo the latches, and roll the bike right off. And if someone wants to use your four-wheel drive while you're riding, they can just take the rack and strap it to your roof rack or keep it aside and drive away without having to worry too much about it. So rather than just talk, I'm going to fit my carrier and load my bike and show you how easy it is. So here we are on the bike. So as you see, the platform goes right into the tow hitch, and we've got two metal fasteners which go onto the foot pegs. So that means it's not going to come off easily, and it prevents the bike from swaying quite a bit. And in addition to that, we have another fastener that goes over the seat that makes sure that the bike doesn't sway. And at the same time, if you want, you can use a lock over here just so that no one steals your bike while you're away. And yeah, seal saver always helps, just so that you don't damage your seals. And more importantly, something that I've noticed when I bought my rack was that it actually covered the car's signal and brake lights. So what I did was fit a pair of additional lights and wired it up to the vehicle's trailer wiring kit. So it's actually a pretty easy process to load the bike and even to unload it. It's a 5-minute one-person job, and I don't think a trailer would be that fast either. So the biggest question that I had when I bought the rack was on if it would be stable enough, because technically the whole thing is pivoting on that one trailer hitch, right? But it barely moves. I'm going to give it a good shake and see how far it actually sways. So with all of that, the bike stays fairly stable, and I've driven with this without any concerns at all. In fact, I've taken the DRZ on this all the way to South Australia, and once you hit the highway, you barely even feel the weight of the rack and the bike. So I think the key to all this is making sure you've got a four-wheel drive that can take this weight, because as soon as your vehicle becomes lighter, the fact that the bike's weight hangs off the rear axle makes it a bit of a danger or a bit of a hazard on the road. One method that I didn't mention is a fairly obvious one, is if you've got a van or if you have a ute. Now, that would make life so much easier, but that also means you need to buy a van or you need to buy a ute. So my scenarios were purely from the standpoint of someone who most likely wouldn't have any of these and doesn't want to spend, well, tens of thousands of dollars buying a vehicle just to transport their bike. Now, look, which way is the best? There is absolutely no correct answer. I've used all three. I ride the bike sometimes. I've used the trail a couple of times. Then I've also used my rack quite frequently. So it always depends on what you're going to use it for, what bike you're riding, and where you're going. And most importantly, your tolerance to be sitting on the bike for a fair bit of time. So this was all based on my personal experience and my own opinion. But I'm sure most of you have your own opinions and how you like to transport your bike. I'd love to hear it. And if you've got any better ideas or if you've got any views I couldn't quite think of, please make sure to leave a comment and let everyone else know. So I hope you found this video useful and picked up a few tips or even some ideas on how you want to carry your bike. But also make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to On Two Wheels for more such videos. Thank you for watching On Two Wheels, and I'll see you next time.